We, the jury, find as follows as to count one of the indictment, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Mrs. Adelson, control yourself.
That's some of what it sounded like September 4th in a Tallahassee, Florida courthouse, the judge delivering the guilty verdict in the murder of Toronto law professor Dan Markel. His 75-year-old former mother-in-law, Donna Adelson, the grandmother to his 2 children, convicted and facing an automatic life in prison sentence. She still has to be sentenced later this year for 2 other charges. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder after the court heard she masterminded Dan Markel's shocking contract killing, paying 2 Latin gang member killers $100,000 to get rid of him. The court was told it was because he was refusing to let his estranged wife, Wendi Adelson, move away from Tallahassee and bring their 2 small boys to Miami to live close to her parents, which would be about a 6-hour drive away. But after Dan Markel was out of the way, Wendi did move the boys there anyway. She also changed their last names to Adelson. And for the last 11 years, contact with the Markels, the Canadian grandparents' family, has had to be done only through court-arranged visits, which the Markels fought for and obtained by lobbying for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to sign a law in 2022 known as the Markel Law that mandates grandparents' visitation rights in the case of traumatic murders like this one. With the conviction of Dan Markel's former mother-in-law, that makes 5 people now behind bars for his murder. And while the prosecutors told reporters after the verdict to stay tuned when she was asked if there might be others arrested, many people wonder if that means Wendi Adelson and her father, although she has consistently denied any involvement. He was stopped 2 years ago at the Miami airport when his wife and he were attempting to flee the USA for Vietnam, which has no extradition treaty. This latest trial of Donna Adelson lasted 3 weeks and gathered much international attention, especially because the U.S. televises the hearings live, including after the verdict when the Markels got to deliver their victim impact statements.
For these reasons, Your Honor, I ask the court sentence Donna Adelson to the maximum possible sentence. And my only short question to Donna, was it worth it?
And at its core, this was a murder of convenience. So that one grandmother could live closer to her grandchildren, she killed their father and ripped the children from the other grandparents' lives.
I'm Ellen Bessner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, September 15th, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. While the crime took place in Florida, Dan Markel's mother and father, Ruth and Phil, live in Toronto, and Ruth in particular has made sure the world never forgets her son's Canadian roots. He was born in Montreal, raised in Toronto, and then studied at Cambridge, Hebrew U, and Harvard. Then he worked as a lawyer in D.C. before taking the professor job at Florida State U, where he married Wendi Adelson in 2006. They had 2 sons, Benji and Lincoln, and after his killing, Markel's body was brought back home to Canada. He's buried in the Pardes Shalom Cemetery, just north of Toronto. Ruth Markel wrote a book about her journey in grief, and as a homicide survivor too, as she calls it, describing the agony of sitting through so many murder trials. The book is titled The Unveiling, and in 2022, when it came out, we interviewed her about it then. She and Dan's father and sister were in Florida again for the recent trial of her former machateiniste, but they're now home in time for the high holidays until the next step in the sentencing. Ruth Markel joins me now to review what it was like this time.
So glad to be here. I'm actually very pleased to be back in Canada after almost 3 weeks at the trial of Donna Adelson in Tallahassee, Florida. So good to see you too.
You had a terrible fall just while you were attending the trial. Do you want to tell our listeners and viewers why you're wearing sunglasses?
Sure. I'm wearing sunglasses because otherwise I look like a raccoon. And I fell in the parking lot in the hotel about 3 days into the trial. And unfortunately, I even had to lose a little time there. I had to go to the Tallahassee Memorial Hospital, but I'm really okay. The effect is the bruising, and the long term should be a very good outcome. So thank you for mentioning it, and I hope you're not too distracted by the sunglasses.
Well, we wish you a speedy recovery and a refuah shlema complete. Of course, this was on top of the trauma that you already had to experience with your family. Your daughter was there. Your former husband, Dan's father, was with you in the trial. Were there other people with you from the family and supporters who were there?
Yes, we actually had quite a few. We had the younger generation this year. That was the big news for them to come. So Shelley's youngest daughter and my niece came from Montreal as well. And this is a good experience for them. Some of them are thinking about social work. Some of them are thinking about law. So I guess maybe from a very intergenerational difficulty might be some positive outcome.
Well, speaking of positive outcomes, so this is number 5, conviction in the long journey since your son was murdered. First of all, I don't know what to say. Do you say congratulations in this case? What does one say?
I don't think it's congratulations, but you could talk about it is a positive outcome. So, there's no congratulations because we still miss Dan. I mean, Danny's gone now 11 years, and there is always that loss and always, the respect for the victim, the direct victim. We are homicide survivors, and he's really the real victim here. And you can forget this story has a lot of glitz and glory, a lot of, sort of periphery things that you can almost forget that somebody has been murdered. And I don't want that ever to happen in the midst of all the news. It's, had tremendous outpouring all over the world before and now for sure. So I think just, never to forget the purpose of why we have to tell this story.
Well, I know that you released the written version of your victim impact statement. And also, people who may have followed the trial, they can find it on video. We will play some excerpts from it shortly. But I wanted to know, who were you actually speaking to? Was this to the family, to the judge? Who was it for?
The victim impact statement actually is a formality, but believe it or not, they actually let the jury go first. So you would think that it was it doesn't sway the jury, but you would think that the jury would be present. So the victim impact statement really is for the judge, because there still is something called sentencing. And in the sentencing, although Donna did get life, there's 2 other crimes. So one is solicitation and one is conspiracy. So the judge has still an option whether he gives, now I'm getting legal technical, but she could either get 30 years for each one or consecutive. So the purpose is really the sentencing objective of why we do a victim impact statement.
So we're going to hear a little bit of your victim impact statement, and we're going to play it now.
My name is Ruth Markel. I am the mother of the late Dan Markel. I stand before you today to express the profound sadness and grief that Dan's family and I have endured since his tragic murder. We have lost a treasure. My son Dan's life was cut tragically short at 41 years old. For 11 years, we have been forced to a life filled with unimaginable pain and heartbreak. Dan's father, Phil, and his sister, Shelley, share in this unending sorrow.
You use the word that she's a curse on your family. This is Donna Adelson.
She blames external forces for her family's curse. They're outside of her, but she is the curse, and lashes out angrily at witnesses who took the brave step to testify. Her modus operandi has always been to run from Tallahassee and then to try to flee to Vietnam. For our family, there is no such prospect for escape. Danny's absence, and that leaves a hole at the center of our lives, no matter where we go.
You wrote this yourself, I assume?
Yes, I did. But let me just tell you about the word. That comes from one of the calls. So we have had, I don't want to use the word privilege, but we all have been listening to some of the calls that Donna Adelson had with Charlie Adelson on the night of his conviction. And she was on a call that she knew was public. All the jail calls are recorded, and it starts out with, "You are on a public recording." But those were her words. I quoted her words. She said, after she was so upset in describing his conviction, she said, "Our family is cursed." And I'm not saying your family is cursed. You cursed your family.
How was it for you sitting in your family in the courtroom when some horribly descriptive, very mean things were said about Danny in terms of how his ex-wife and her mother-in-law called him some very bad things? Hearing some of the things, like they called him a sexually transmitted disease, it's horrible. How does that sit with you and your family?
Well, I think I want to go back a step because I think that there were horrible names, and I just want to bridge one kind of thing that's we have in our culture right now. There is a lot of divorce. There is a lot of estrangement. There is a lot of brainwashing kids, and that's going out in what we would call healthy or normal families, if you see what I'm saying. But nobody commits murder, so I think that it's a caution to all of us, really, when we get too over excited about some of the terrible things in our life, and you don't go to murder, but you do say these things sometimes. And therefore what I want to kind of bring home, let's call it, is that it's a terrible feeling to say that I've also heard it from other people when they're in this crazy process of going through something contentious, and they say in the States, I don't know in Canada, that there's actually more murders at the family court than there are when they have them. They don't have them like as much, but the point is because of the disputes. So it's a terrible thing, and yet it's something that I kind of want to caution from.
So in other words, Loishan Hara can be, we're speaking, listen, 24 hours after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the podcaster. Now I know it's a whole different case, but it's all about words, and then actions happen, and it's a consequence. It can be a consequence of hate speech.
Right, and violent murder. I think this is a difference. All these family issues that were just identified and those terrible words, but the fact is that if it ends in murder, it's a violent death, and the family, as homicide survivors, it's not normal loss. So the long-term impacts of actually going through a murder experience is totally, totally devastating. And to do the criminal system, we're now on our fourth time in the trial. So you're actually revisiting all the time the original murder. And that's very harmful and very, very devastating.
Your ex-husband, Dan's father, spoke and made even like a Jewish blessing go into a Jewish curse. And here's what Dan's father, Phil, had to say during his victim impact statement.
In the Jewish custom, we have an expression to always wish others to live to 120 years of age. For Donna, I wish her to live to 120, alone in her jail cell. I wish that every day of her remaining days she thinks about the harm she has caused to so many, especially those two boys she claims to have loved so much.
I think part of both of our presentations on the victim impact statements talked about all the children. So we have two grandchildren that are left behind, moved from state to state now because of the fact that they have the Adelson name, and the Adelson, I'll say the word here, curse. And as a result of that, they have no normal lives. They have an uncle who's now in jail and convicted, and their grandmother who actually brought them up for quite a few years, and she's convicted. So from the offshoot of losing Dan to all of the other people, Zigfredo Garcia, who's the shooter, Catherine McBanawa, the liaison, there's two parents who have children who have, no parents as a result of this story. Even Charlie Adelson has a little boy, and he won't see him for the rest of his life. So I think that was part of where Phil was really driving home, the parts of the destruction of so many lives just from this woman, Donna Adelson, because, as they say in all of the journal, all of the media, she wanted to relocate. her grandchildren to South Florida from Tallahassee. So for her, desire, which was so intense, and she was, really obsessed with it and so forth, all these families are now devastated.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
There was, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
So what happens to you and your family now? You have time until the sentencing. Do we know when that is going to happen for Donna?
Yes, we don't have the exact date. There's a case management date that was just set up for October 14th. The sentencing date I believe, will be before November, but I'm really not 100% sure.
Mm-hmm. And so your victim impact statement, you don't have to repeat it. That's it.
We have an option because the next real time when we'll have this conference, we do have the chance to repeat our victim impact statements. I don't think we're going to go to Tallahassee, but sometimes we'll do it on Zoom. So we'll see what the judge really wants.
So you've been back home for a few days since the 3 weeks in Tallahassee, and now the Jewish holidays are coming. Dan's birthday is coming, October 9th. How do you recover from this?
Well, it takes time. I mean, the one thing I think that just for people to understand, when you achieve a certain level of equilibrium and comfort in what I'll call a normal post period of a trial, but that takes a long time. And then in our case, we really are continuously involved in so many hearings, which was a hard trial. Her trial was hard, not because only it was Donna Adelson, but prior to that, they wanted a bond hearing. Then she had problems with the inmates. So for almost 6 months before her trial, you have all this agitation and you have to go to these conferences. And then, of course, the public, we have a lot of, I have to say at the same time, we're very grateful to the media. So anybody of your followers, the podcasts are out there, the print is out there, social media is out there, digital is out there. So normally there's a bit of a quiet period. I'm not sure post Donna's final sentencing how quiet it'll be. When it gets a little quiet, you have a chance to re-engage in your normal activities. But at this stage, I would still say we're still either not coming off the trial and truthfully probably still inundated with media requests and a lot of follow-up. So some of it is positive and some of it is you're carrying the burden still.
You were mentioning your grandchildren. I know that our listeners will be aware, because you've talked about it with us before, about the law that Florida passed of a grandparent estrangement. Since the last few years, have you been at all in contact with your grandchildren, Ben and Lincoln?
Yes, we had. So what happened after the Markel Act was passed in Florida, there was a slight window that opened up, and we did see the children. There were different, very, very brief family visits. It's all through Wendy's devices. The boys are now 16 and almost 15. And we have no direct contact with them, meaning we don't have any chance to email. Everything is through Wendy's devices and contact stuff. And at that level, I'll say that it's also highly choreographed. So you can be on for 15, 20 minutes on a Zoom for the birthday. And then it's like a director behind the scene cutting you off. It's not natural.
Yeah, it's awkward. Yeah.
And awkward. But they know who we are now. And I think that's probably more important. than anything else. I'm an optimist type. They're starting to ask about Dan in our conversations, which is good. And I would like them to come and see, Dan's grave, his history, his school, his family. They were here a lot, but they were preschoolers. Hopefully we'll get to see our sunshines, her sunshines. That was Donna's expression for the boys.
Hmm. And as far as you mentioned, so much media, what is going to happen, maybe small screen or even big screen portrayal documentary, what's been happening in those avenues?
Well, I do really have a very interesting development with Lionsgate to do a 3-part documentary. There's tremendous interest from all over the world. So, this is going to be big news. I mean, these are big, big stories. We're getting requests from every major, we already have, it's been in New York Times, it's all over the world. And let it be, but let's not forget who Dan was. That's the most important, and our loss. That's why I said at the beginning, we lost a treasure, and I think that's the most important message.
And last time I spoke to you, they were going to be doing some scholarship or event at Harvard University. Is that still ongoing each year now? And what else is happening? Yeah.
Okay, so there is a new kind of a legacy project that Justice for Dan is trying to do. It can include Harvard, and I spoke at Harvard, but it probably could include Harvard. So it's for students who want to study criminal law in the same areas of interest like that Dan had. And so there's some requests for papers for, I would call it scholarships and different things that will be administered through Justice for Dan. And certainly Florida State University, FSU, where Dan taught, is very, very part of the program and part of the initiative.
Okay, there was something that came out during the trial. If you have another minute, I want to bring it up because see if I
Sure.
can understand it. Part of the hearings, they mentioned that the dispute between Dan and Wendi had something to do with religion. What does that mean? They were both Jewish. So what was the religion aspect that she was talking about?
The Jewish factor is very big in this particular case. So what happened was when Danny and Wendi got engaged, they talked about the house would be kosher when the children were born. That was an agreement before. And the first initial years, the house was totally vegetarian. And if Danny wanted to entertain, which he did sometimes, mostly actually when we were there, he had kosher meat dishes and so forth. So there was no real conflict pre. But when they went to daycare, now they're born, and daycare serving, hot dogs, who knows what were in them. Both Danny and Wendi, now this is an important point. Initially, they brought tofu. The daycare gave out the tofu, falafel, hot dogs, whatever. But Donna, now here's where you see her meddling. This is part of what the whole case is about. She went to the daycare and she started to tell the daycare, don't worry about it. Just give them the regular hot dogs. And the same thing when they went to soccer. Afterwards, she took them to McDonald's and she gave them cheeseburgers. So she already started to sabotage. So the beginning of really the unraveling of the marriage related to the religious factor started from Donna. And then Danny did want to become not more observant. He was never like Shomer Shabbat or anything like that, but he brought the children, as often as possible on a Saturday morning or a Friday night. So it wasn't so much between Dan and Wendi, it was much more Donna.
So the prosecutor at the end of the trial, like what's going to happen next? Because everyone's saying, okay, you got all of these 5. What about Wendi? What about Harvey? So she said, stay tuned.
Right.
What feelings do you have when you hear her say these things?
I think that they will make a decision in terms of how they feel about the other parties in the family. It is a murder for hire. It is a murder where that we know, and even in this last trial, there was much more that was now released about, certain communications pre and post the murder. So that, this is a game of evidence. When we normally think as people who've lost somebody and so forth, you think of your loss, you think of your tragedy, but the lawyers, it's all it is evidence. Evidence is the mantra of the day. So they have to feel they have enough.
But as the grandmother, if Wendi gets convicted, let's say, I'll hypothetical, and she goes to prison, who's going to look after the boys? Something you weigh on your mind, I assume.
It is, but you remember now, this is a different game. Like when it was preschoolers, they're now all 16. And similar to here, they will have a big choice. Certainly I would run down and I would try to bridge whatever I could. And it also depends about Harvey. If the father is there, and Wendi has a significant boyfriend at this point. So there's a lot of factors. But the fact, really, the big picture, big picture is the boys have a decision now. I would love to say that, we'll pick them up and run away with them and so forth. But it won't happen that way. It's going to be a court issue with them, not us, with them being the major decision makers of what's going to happen to them. Sad.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I wonder if you went to Danny's grave and told them what had happened when you came home.
I didn't get there yet, but I went before. I went before the trial. And I will. And that was one of the things I do, to actually visit the cemetery frequently. I did my pre-visit before, I like to go to Jewish holidays. So I did it before Donna's trial, but I will definitely get back very soon.
And thanks again for sharing the latest.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be back. And hopefully there's more to come.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. You can watch the trial verdict and the Markel's victim impact statements through the link in our show notes, and also go there to learn more about her book. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. Michael Freeman's our executive producer, and the theme music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.